Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and thank you so much for joining. I'm Joel Freeman, and you're watching Wholehearted. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. This is the second video in a two-part series about how to tell what a disc will fly like without throwing it. Now, in my last video, I covered the topics of depth and inner rim angle. And so if you missed out on that, go back. I'll be referencing that video a few times. And hopefully for those of you who did watch it, hopefully you enjoyed it. Watching back over that last video, I realized that I definitely mixed up my words a handful of times. And so hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I'll try to avoid continuing on with that trend today. In this video, we're talking all about the topic of dome. Now, dome is my favorite topic in all of disc golf. And as I mentioned in the last video, excited to get into it. By the way, I just need to take a moment and shout out these Kona Emperors from a few years back. Look at the dome on this thing. Just listen to that. Talking about discs in a room in my home, spitting fresh rhymes straight off the dome. I really hope y'all are feeling my vibe, and I hope it inspires you to like and subscribe. First and foremost, what impact does dome have on the flight of a disc? First and foremost, I think it's common sense. It'll make a disc have more glide, so the disc will stay in the air longer, has potential to go farther, but maybe. That brings us to the next thing that dome will do to a disc, and that is slow it down. So it'll make a disc slower and glidier. It just makes the disc less aerodynamic. So a flat disc cuts right through. A dome disc has more surface area for the air fighting against the disc to hit, if that makes sense. So pretty simple so far, nothing crazy, probably no big surprises to most of you. However, this is where it gets a little bit weird. Dome will cause a disc to act more overstable at high speeds and more understable at low speeds. This is most pronounced with high-speed discs, just as any flight characteristics are that vary from one disc to another. But this train of logic only works if the profile on the side is identical from one disc to another. So the relation to the outer wing to the surface underneath it, all that. But let's just imagine we have three destroyers. One's super domey, one has a little bit of dome, and one is dead flat. A flat disc will be more understable at high speeds and overstable at low speeds at the end of the flight. So in other words, dome makes a disc all around straighter, turn less early and fade less at the end. And flatness makes a disc curve more. So turn more early, fade more at the end. So it's just an all-around wilder flight. Now, in my mind, all of that can be boiled down to dome makes a disc easier to control, or makes the flight of a disc more forgiving. I think where the big conflict in this conversation comes is where people talk about comfort. Now, I think it's pretty much unanimously agreed upon that domey discs are a little bit less comfortable in the hand, especially on a forehand. However, like I said, it's a more controllable disc. So where's the trade-off there? If we were not human, and if we were all machines and we could throw perfectly, my belief is that there would maybe be no flat discs out there. I think the only thing that makes humans like flat discs more is because we're able to execute a shot more successfully, and so it's worth the trade-off of a flight that's tougher to control and it's more wild, because our release of the disc is more predictable, more clean, less wild. So when you look at the kind of like putter and mid conversation versus the driver conversation, putters and mids, I think, again, it's pretty well agreed upon that flat is preferred, whereas drivers, dome is usually preferred when it comes to like maximum distance. Now, I think part of the reason for that, this topic gets really complicated really fast. So let me see if I can break it down with some clarity. So a slower disk is less forgiving, and so a perfect release is more important. Also, with a driver going double or triple the distance or whatever, the margin for error is so much wider, and so it becomes worth it to have that slightly less clean release on a high-speed driver at 400, 500 feet or whatever it is, because it's in the air for so long and there's so much that can go right or wrong, versus from a shorter distance, you would rather have that cleaner release and the less ideal controllability, I guess. The controllability is less of a factor with the shape of the flight plate because it's a slower disc. The controllability comes from the bluntness. And so the problem kind of solves itself. There's not really any need for a dummy mid-range or putter. It just doesn't make sense. It's not worth it. I know I didn't explain that perfectly, but we'll just let that rest for now. Now, some of you might be thinking to yourself, what are you talking about? Flat makes a disc more flippy and more overstable? That doesn't make any sense. Because I can think of like my flat top Firebird, for example, there's nothing flippy about it. It is beef, beef, beef. I would like to present a theory that when you're talking about a tilt or a flat top Firebird, or some of these super overstable, super flat discs, just like any other disc would be, there's no exception here, that flat top Firebird, that flat top of the Firebird, makes it more understable at high speeds and more overstable at low speeds, but you're never getting the disc up to speed in order to see the disc turn or take flight. It is, even if you release it on an anhyzer angle out of the hand, you're only seeing that disc fade the moment it releases. You're never seeing a turn. So I think you'd probably need 150 mile per hour throw, maybe 200, I don't know, in order to actually get that flat top Firebird up to speed to the point where you would see it turn. In which case, if you did that, you would see more turn at a high speed and then an aggressive fade at the end, as opposed to with the Domi Firebird, it would turn less early. So a huge factor of this conversation is the speed of release. And that's why I think some of this topic can get confusing or muddy to a lot of people. And it's hard to prove some of these theories because everyone throws at a different speed. Each and every one of us throws at different speeds day to day, depending on how we're feeling or how warm we are or whatever. And so you're just inevitably going to get all sorts of mixed messages and different data and whatever. I'll tell a brief story about this. It was a World. If any of you guys have ever thrown the World, it's a high-speed driver, and it was flat. And as far as I knew, it was super duper overstable. And one day I threw a forehand. It was during the tournament. It was under pressure. I was a little nervous, and so I gave it that really nice extra pop. I had only ever seen this thing fade hard and skip. It just loved to get back on that hyzer angle. And so as far as I knew, it was reliable through and through. I popped that sucker on a little, kind of flat or slight ante, and it just anteed more and just never came back because it had so much speed on it that I saw that other side of the flight characteristic of that disc, whereas up until that point, I had never gotten it up to speed to be able to see the extra turn that the flatness was giving me. I only saw that accentuated fade that was produced by the flatness of the profile of that disc. All right, I wanted to take a second to look at this diagram, and it's going to sound a little bit like some of the stuff we were talking about in my previous video. I think a lot of people naturally assume that a flatter disc means a more overstable disc. And part of that is because if, in theory, if you were to manipulate the profile of a disc post molding process, post manufacturing, all of that, then that would be true. I think when you pull the dome up, you're probably going to pull the outer wing down, and the outer wing is going to have a greater influence on the stability of a disc than dome will. Conversely, if you flatten that middle out, in theory it should bring the outsides up. However, as we discussed in our previous video, that's not necessarily a direct correlation between the dome and anything about the inner rim angle or the outer wing or whatever. Now on this other side of the diagram, I didn't draw it perfectly, but I've tried to demonstrate basically the same profile on the side of the disc, independent of the dome in the middle. And so this is my least favorite type of disc ever. This is a high-speed puddle top disc, and I think we've all encountered a disc like this, like in a used bin or something. And if you've ever thrown it, it's horrible. It's so impossible to control. It's probably unbelievably flippy, but then the moment that you don't flip it over, it fades so hard. It fades so aggressively. So it's so hard to control. And so kind of same idea here. That's not the kind of disc that I would ever put in my bag. Neither of those. Now this starts to look nice. And if you get something like this is like, there was a run of Metal Flake Destroyers, I think first run Metal Flake Destroyers back in the day, 10, 12 years ago or something, and the profile looked so much like this. It was like a lot of glide and super beefy, and so they went far, but they were so reliable. These are the kind of discs, as far as we're talking about drivers, that are going to find their way into my bag. All right, that is all I've got for you guys today. Definitely a really complex topic, and I know I didn't explain all of it perfectly, but hopefully you guys learned something from it. I'm sure there are a handful of you out there who've got your flat, high-speed drivers that you think you love, but for your own good, I'm just letting you know it's probably all in your head. You're probably either imagining that you like it more than your dummy drivers, or you just need to do a little bit of field work and work on cleaning up that release. That goes for everybody who's throwing forehands as well. If you're scared of throwing doming discs forehand, just work on it a little bit. Throw your putters, throw your mids, throw discs that won't lie to you. Throw discs that will wobble, that are more prone to wobble out of the hand. Start from shorter ranges and learn how to throw them smooth, and then work your way back little by little. You'll be able to throw any disc on any angle before you know it. As always, I truly do appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in. I'm Joel Freeman, you're watching Wholehearted, and we will see you next time.